A millionaire is driving down a deserted highway when he sees a 6-year-old girl standing alone by the roadside, raising her hands in desperation and crying. When he asks where her parents are, she clasps her hands together and whispers, "Sir, my daddy left me here." Outraged, he decides to take her back home, but when he knocks on the door, the father looks at him and says 2 words that make the millionaire furious. The soft purr of the luxury engine was the only sound breaking the oppressive silence of that Thursday afternoon. Arthur Drummond drove down the deserted highway, a ribbon of grey asphalt stretching across a monotonous, forgotten landscape. Heavy, dark clouds gathered in the sky, promising a storm that mirrored the restlessness in his soul. Despite all his success, the fortune that afforded him every material comfort, there was a void that money couldn't fill, an echo of loneliness that had haunted him since childhood. He tried to fill it with acts of philanthropy, with an almost compulsive need to right the world's wrongs, but the feeling of powerlessness always returned. At that moment, he just wanted to get to his country estate, a refuge of silence and order, far from the complexities of city life. That's when he saw it, a tiny, motionless speck on the shoulder of the road, almost blending in with the dry brush. It took his brain a second to process the image. It wasn't an animal, it was a child, alone. Arthur's heart gave a painful leap in his chest. A cold wave washed over him, and a primal instinct to protect took over. Prudence whispered in his ear, warning of the dangers of getting involved, of the complications that could arise, but the image of that small figure, so vulnerable against the vastness of the empty road, screamed louder. It was a ghost from his own childhood, a memory of abandonment he had spent his entire life trying to erase. He couldn't just drive on. It wasn't a choice. It was a moral obligation that pulsed in his blood. Hitting the brakes, he maneuvered the car onto the shoulder, the sound of the tires on the gravel seeming like a profanity in the sepulchral silence. He cut the engine, and the world fell mute, save for the whistling wind. He opened the door, and the cold air hit him, carrying with it the faint sound of crying, a sob so quiet it was barely audible, yet it tore at the soul. The girl couldn't have been more than 6. She wore a thin, faded dress, completely inadequate for the weather, and her little feet were in worn-out flats. Her small face was smudged with dirt and tears, and her tangled brown hair danced in the cruel breeze. She saw him approach and shrank back, her large, frightened eyes fixed on him. Arthur stopped at a safe distance, crouching to get on her level. He knew his presence, a tall, unknown man, could be terrifying. "Hello," he said, his voice as calm and gentle as he could manage. "My name is Arthur. Are you okay?" The girl just shook her head, a stronger sob escaping her lips. Her shoulders trembled uncontrollably. "Are you lost?" He tried again, his heart tight with anguish. "Where are your parents? I can help you find them." She lifted her eyes to him, and in them Arthur saw an abyss of despair no child should ever know. Her small hands clasped together in a pleading gesture, and her voice, a trembling, broken whisper, carried the words that would make Arthur's world crumble. "Mister," she murmured, each syllable a blow to his chest. "My daddy left me here." The little girl's words hung in the cold air, sharp as shards of glass. "My daddy left me here." Each syllable pierced Arthur's heart, awakening a cold fury he hadn't felt in years. It wasn't an explosive rage, but a chilling, dark current of indignation that spread through his veins. It was the anger of someone who knew the pain of abandonment firsthand, who carried the invisible scars of a stolen childhood. In that small, trembling figure, he didn't just see a stranger. He saw the ghost of himself. The frightened boy who had also once felt discarded by the world. He swallowed hard, forcing himself to regain composure. Panicking wouldn't help her. "All right," he said, his voice a little rougher than he intended. "Let's get you out of this cold, okay? My car is right there. It's warm and safe. Then we'll figure out what to do." She hesitated, fear warring with desperation in her eyes. He held out his hand, palm open, a universal gesture of peace. "I'm not going to hurt you, I promise." Slowly, like a cornered animal, she took a step toward him, then another, until her icy little fingers touched his hand. They were so small and fragile. He gently guided her to the car, opened the passenger door, and helped her into the plush leather seat. She curled up, looking even smaller inside the spacious vehicle. Arthur closed the door, walked around, and slid behind the wheel, feeling the weight of this sudden responsibility settle on his shoulders. He cranked the heater to high and took off his own coat, carefully wrapping it around her. She nestled into the warm fabric, a shaky sigh escaping her lips. For a few minutes, they sat in silence, the only sound the soft whir of the heater. "What's your name, sweetheart?" he asked, keeping his voice low. "Leah," she whispered, the name barely audible. "Leah, that's a beautiful name," Arthur said with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Leah, do you know where you live? Can you tell me your address? Maybe your dad just got lost." Leah shook her head, her eyes fixed on the dashboard. "We live near the old bridge, the yellow house with the broken door." The description was vague, but it was a start. It was a poorer area in the next town over, a place Arthur only knew from passing through. The knot in his stomach tightened. He knew he should call the police, call Child Protective Services. It was the correct, sensible procedure. But the image of Leah's terrified face and the echo of his own history stopped him. He wouldn't hand her over to strangers, to a cold, impersonal system, not until he understood what was really happening. He needed to see for himself. "Okay, Leah, I think I know where that is. We'll take you home," he said, putting the car in gear. The drive was short and tense. Leah didn't say another word, just watched the landscape pass with a vacant expression. Arthur, on the other hand, was fighting an internal battle. What would he say? How would he confront a man who left his own daughter on the side of a highway? Finally, he spotted the house, a small, run-down building, the yellow paint peeling, a door hanging precariously from one hinge. He parked and turned to Leah. "Is this it?" She nodded, shrinking deeper into the coat. Together, they got out of the car and walked across the weed-choked lawn. Arthur felt Leah's gaze on his back, a mixture of fear and a strange sort of hope. He took a deep breath, raised his hand, and knocked. The hollow sound echoed. Shuffling footsteps sounded from inside, and the door creaked open. A disheveled-looking man with glazed eyes and a strong stench of alcohol appeared in the gap. He looked at Arthur, then at Leah, and a sneer formed on his lips. "Ah, so you found her," he said, his voice slurred. Arthur opened his mouth to speak, to demand an explanation, but the man cut him off. He gave Leah a slight push forward and looked directly at Arthur, his contempt so potent it chilled his blood. "She's all yours." And before Arthur could react, the door slammed in his face with a final, irrefutable violence. The sound of the slamming door echoed in the quiet street, a cruel and definitive period. Arthur stood there, stunned, his hand still raised in the air. The smell of alcohol and neglect seemed to emanate from the door's worn wood. Beside him, Leah was trembling, not from cold, but from a pain so deep it seemed to suffocate her. She wasn't crying. Instead, her small eyes were fixed on the closed door with a resignation that was infinitely more desolate than any tears. The rage Arthur had felt on the road returned with full force, a hot wave rising in his chest. The cruelty of that gesture, the brutality of those words, "She's all yours," was more than he could bear. It was the objectification of a child, the complete nullification of her existence as a human being. He banged on the door again, harder this time, the sound of his knuckles against the wood like a cry of protest. "Open this door!" he yelled, his voice thick with a fury he could barely control. "We need to talk." No response. Only the heavy silence of a house that seemed to have died inside. He banged once more, desperation starting to mix with his anger. "You can't just do this. She's your daughter." The only answer was the sound of a bottle shattering somewhere inside, followed by a muffled, bitter laugh. It was useless. The man wasn't going to open up. Arthur turned to Leah. She was watching him with an expression he couldn't decipher, a mix of fear, shame, and a spark of something he didn't dare name as hope. Her small shoulders slumped in defeat. "Let's get in the car," he said, his voice now low and tight. He guided her back to the safe haven of his vehicle, feeling utterly lost. What was he supposed to do now? Leave her here on the porch of this hostile house? Impossible. Take her to the police station. The thought filled him with dread. He remembered the cold, impersonal rooms, the tired, bureaucratic faces from his own childhood. Leah was already traumatized. Handing her over to a system that would treat her like a case number felt like a second betrayal. He looked at the decrepit house and made a decision. He had to see. He had to understand what Leah endured every day. "Leah," he said softly, "is there another way in? A window, maybe?" She thought for a moment, then pointed to the side of the house. "My bedroom window. Sometimes Daddy locks the door and I have to get in that way." Arthur's heart broke a little more. He followed her around the house to a low, small window, its frame rotting and the glass cracked. With a little effort, the window gave way. The smell that wafted out was nauseating, a mix of mildew, spoiled food, and the sour odor of spilled liquor. Arthur swallowed hard and, with a heavy heart, helped Leah through the opening. Then, with some difficulty, he squeezed through himself. What he saw confirmed his worst fears. Leah's room was tiny, with little more than a thin, dirty mattress on the floor and a pile of clothes heaped in a corner. There were no toys, no books, no trace of childhood. The entire house was in a shocking state of neglect. Empty and half-empty liquor bottles were scattered everywhere like landmines. Plates with moldy food remnants rotted in the kitchen sink. A layer of grime covered every surface. It was an environment of despair, a place where hope had long since died. Arthur felt a wave of nausea. No child should live like this. The decision to take her from the road hadn't been impulsive. It had been necessary. "Come on, Leah. You're not staying here another minute," he said, his voice firm. He took her by the hand, but she stopped, her eyes wide with panic. "No, we can't call the cops," she pleaded, her voice rising to a sharp pitch of terror. "Please." "Mr. A, don't call the cops." The intensity of her fear took him by surprise. It wasn't just a child's apprehension, it was a deep, almost visceral dread that seemed to come from past experience. What could have happened to make her so afraid of the very people who were supposed to protect her? The panic in Leah's eyes was so genuine, so overwhelming, that Arthur's urge to contact the authorities instantly dissolved. He knelt on the grimy floor, bringing himself to her level again, trying to convey a calm he didn't feel. "Okay, Leah, I won't call the police. I promise," he said, his voice firm but gentle. "We won't do anything you don't want to do. But you can't stay here. This place isn't safe for you." He looked around at the desolation of the house, and the certainty of his decision solidified. He was breaking rules, maybe even laws, but his conscience gave him no other choice. "You're coming with me. You can stay at my house for a while, until we figure things out. What do you think?" A flicker of uncertainty crossed the girl's face. The idea of going with a stranger was frightening, but the prospect of staying there, in that oppressive environment, was clearly worse. She looked at the filthy mattress in the corner, at the shadows gathering in the rooms, and then her eyes returned to Arthur. There was something about him, a kindness in his gaze, a steadiness in his voice, that inspired a fragile trust. She nodded slowly, an almost imperceptible movement. "Is there anything you want to take with you?" he asked. Leah looked around her tiny, empty room. Her eyes landed on a dark corner under the window. She walked over and crouched down, pulling a small, battered teddy bear with a missing eye from a hole in the floorboards. She hugged it tightly, as if it were the only precious thing in her world. That simple gesture, the way she clung to the damaged toy, told Arthur more about her loneliness than 1,000 words. "Great. Let's bring your friend," he said, forcing a smile. He helped her climb back out the window, handed her the bear, and then followed. The fresh air outside felt like a blessing after the suffocating atmosphere of the house. Back in the car, the reality of the situation began to weigh on Arthur. He was, for all intents and purposes, taking a child that wasn't his without any legal permission. He wasn't a father, had never imagined himself as one. His life was a carefully controlled routine of work and voluntary solitude. Introducing a child into that equation was like throwing a stone into a perfectly still lake, creating ripples he had no idea how to manage. As he drove toward his home, a sanctuary of minimalism and order, the silence in the car was thick. Leah was curled up in the seat, clutching her bear, watching as the houses grew larger and more imposing. When Arthur finally pulled up to the gates of his mansion, Leah's eyes widened. "You live here," she whispered, her voice full of awe. "Yes, Leah, this is my home, and for now, it's yours too." In the days that followed, a strange and delicate routine began to form. Arthur bought Leah new clothes, toys, books. He discovered she was a quiet, observant girl who was startled by loud noises and slow to trust. Arthur's housekeeper, a middle-aged woman named Helena, regarded the situation with a mix of concern and compassion, but quickly grew fond of the girl, making her favorite foods and reading her stories before bed. Arthur found himself doing things he'd never imagined, watching cartoons, trying to untangle fine hair, and even learning to make clumsy braids. For the first time in a long time, the house didn't feel so empty. There were tentative laughs echoing in the halls, but the tranquility was a fragile illusion. In the back of his mind, Arthur knew that Leah's father wouldn't stay silent forever. The drunken indifference he had shown could easily turn into something far more dangerous when sobriety or necessity came knocking. And he was right. A week after the rescue on the road, Arthur's phone rang. It was an unknown number. "Hello," he answered cautiously. The voice on the other end was the same slurred, gravelly one he'd heard through the door. "So, the rich guys still got my daughter?" It wasn't a question. Arthur felt a chill. "What do you want?" he asked. His voice cold. The man's laugh was unpleasant. "I know who you are, Drummond. Saw your car. Wasn't hard to figure out. A man with so much money. Must be enjoying playing house." Arthur remained silent, his heart pounding. "She's my daughter," the man continued, his tone shifting, becoming more calculated. "And what you did, that's got a name. Kidnapping. Ever think how that would look in the papers? The great philanthropist stealing a poor father's little girl." The veiled threat hung in the air, poisonous and clear. The game had changed. The word kidnapping hit Arthur like a punch to the gut. He knew his actions, however well-intentioned, had put him in a legally precarious position. He glanced through the glass door of his office, where Leah was sitting on the living room rug, absorbed in a coloring book Helena had given her. The scene was so peaceful, so normal, that the threat coming through the phone felt like a grotesque violation. "What exactly are you implying?" Arthur asked, keeping his voice steady despite the anxiety building in his chest. On the other end of the line, the man, whose name he didn't even know yet, let out a low, smug laugh. "I'm not implying anything. I'm stating a fact. You took my daughter without my permission. That's against the law, isn't it? I could go to the police right now. Imagine the scandal." Arthur closed his eyes, the reality of the trap closing in around him. Leah's father wasn't interested in his daughter's well-being. He had smelled money. The initial indifference had morphed into calculated interest. "State your price," Arthur said, cutting through the preamble. "Ah, now we're talking," the man said, his tone oily. "You see, my dear Leah's absence has caused me great emotional trauma, immense suffering, and you, with your interference, are responsible for it." Arthur tasted bitter bile in his throat. The man's audacity was unbelievable. He wanted to shut the scoundrel down, to yell about the filthy house and the abandonment on the road. But he knew any outburst of anger would only make things worse. He had to play the game, for now. "How much?" Arthur asked, the word leaving his lips like poison. There was a pause, as if the man was savoring the moment. "Let's start with 50,000, a small compensation for my suffering, and of course, to ensure my silence about your act of charity." Arthur hung up the phone, his hand trembling with rage. $50,000. It was an insignificant sum to him, but the principle of it disgusted him. He was being blackmailed by a man who saw his own daughter as a lottery ticket. His first reaction was to call his attorney, to expose everything. But then, the image of Leah, her terrified eyes pleading with him not to call the police, flashed in his mind. Involving lawyers and authorities would mean dragging Leah into the center of a legal battle, forcing her to relive her trauma, and worst of all, risking that she'd be returned to that monster or lost in the labyrinth of the foster care system. He couldn't do that to her. He would pay. For Leah, he would pay. The next day, following precise instructions, Arthur left a briefcase with the money in a trash can in a remote park. He felt dirty, complicit in a sick scheme. He hoped that would be the end of it, but deep down, he knew it was only the beginning. The peace that followed was short and fragile. It lasted exactly 3 days. On the morning of the 4th day, the doorbell rang. Helena answered and returned to the breakfast room with a worried expression. "Mr. Drummond, it's 2 police officers. They want to speak with you." Arthur's heart plummeted. He stood up, his mind racing. "Helena, please take Leah to the back room and put on a movie for her. Don't let her hear anything." He walked to the door, his body tense. 2 uniformed officers, an older man and a younger woman, stood on his porch. "Mr. Arthur Drummond?" the older officer asked. "Yes, that's me. How can I help you?" "We're here to investigate a missing persons report. A Mr. Ricardo Hayes has filed a complaint alleging that his daughter, Leah Hayes, was taken by you over a week ago. The manipulation was brilliant in its wickedness. The father, Ricardo, had taken the money and reported him anyway. He was playing both sides, using the law as a weapon to apply more pressure. "This is a misunderstanding, officers," Arthur said, trying to remain calm. "The girl is here. She's safe. Her father claims you stole her, Mr. Drummond. He's very worried." The female officer interrupted, her gaze sweeping over the luxurious house with a hint of suspicion. "May we see the girl?" At that exact moment, Leah, who must have slipped past Helena's attention, appeared in the hallway, her small face pale with fear at the sight of the uniforms. "Mr. Arthur," she called out, her voice trembling. The female officer knelt. "Hello? Leah, we're the police. We've come to take you back to your daddy." Leah's reaction was instantaneous and violent. A sharp scream of pure terror escaped her lips. "No! I don't want to go! Don't take me! Please!" she shrieked, running to Arthur and clinging to his leg with desperate strength, her entire body shaking with sobs. Leah's shriek echoed through the house, a raw sound of dread that silenced everyone. She clung to Arthur's leg as if her life depended on it, her small body racked with violent sobs. Her face was buried in the fabric of his pants, muffling her desperate pleas. "No, please, don't make me go back. I want to stay with Mr. Arthur." The 2 officers exchanged an uneasy glance. The girl's reaction was not what they'd expected. Instead of relief at being found, she was exhibiting absolute terror at the mere mention of returning to her father. The younger officer, whose name tag read Sandra, tried a gentler approach. "Leah, honey, it's okay. No one's going to hurt you," she said, her voice calm. "We just want to make sure you're safe. Your father is worried." At the word father, Leah flinched, her crying intensifying. "He's mean. I don't want to go," she sobbed. Arthur placed a protective hand on Leah's head, his heart breaking at her anguish. He looked at the officers, his expression a mixture of pleading and defiance. "Officers, you see how she is. She's terrified. Something is very wrong in that home. I found her alone on the side of a highway. Her father abandoned her." The older officer, a grey-haired man named Sergeant Davis, frowned. "Mr. Hayes told us a different story. He said he stopped the car for mechanical trouble, and when he turned around, the girl was gone. He claims you took her before he could find her and refused to return her." The lie was so blatant, so well-constructed, it sent a chill down Arthur's spine. Ricardo wasn't just neglectful, he was a cunning manipulator. He had twisted an act of rescue into a crime, and his narrative, that of a desperate father, was far more palatable to the law than that of a millionaire who takes a child to his mansion. "That's a lie," Arthur said, his voice rising. "He was drunk. He told me to keep her and slammed the door in my face." "Do you have any proof of that, sir?" Sergeant Davis asked, his tone neutral, bureaucratic. Arthur hesitated. No, he didn't. It was his word against Ricardo's. And in the eyes of the law, Ricardo was the father, the legal guardian. Arthur was just a wealthy stranger. "The proof is the state she's in. Look at her," he insisted, his frustration growing. "The proof is the filthy house she was living in." "We'll be checking the residence, sir," Officer Sandra said. "But for now, standard procedure is to take the child to a neutral location under the supervision of Child Protective Services until the situation is clarified." The mention of CPS sent a new kind of fear through Arthur. He knew that once Leah entered the system, getting her out would be a Herculean battle. She would become a file, a case to be processed. "No, please," Arthur said, his voice low. "Don't take her. I will cooperate in every way. I'll hire the best lawyers, pay for any necessary evaluations. Just don't take her from here. She's just started to feel safe." As he spoke, two serious-looking women with ID badges entered the house. Social workers. The situation was spiraling out of his control at an alarming speed. One of them approached Leah. "Hello, Leah. My name is Claudia. We're here to help you. We're going to a nice place where you can play." Leah looked at the woman, her eyes swollen from crying, then at Arthur, a silent plea in her gaze. Then, in a quick, unexpected move, she let go of Arthur's leg and ran. She didn't go to her room, but to a small closet under the stairs, cramming herself into the dark space and shutting the door from the inside. The click of the lock was audible in the tense silence. Everyone froze. "Leah, come out of there, sweetheart," the social worker called, her voice tinged with impatience. "Leah, please open the door." The only sound from the closet was a muffled sob. Officer Sandra turned to Arthur, her gaze now hardened. "Mr. Drummond, what have you been telling this child?" Her refusal to cooperate. "This fear of authorities, this is highly irregular. It appears she's been under an inappropriate psychological influence." The accusation hit him like a physical blow. His attempts to protect her, to give her a haven, were being twisted, turned into a weapon against him. The system that was supposed to protect Leah was becoming her greatest threat, and he, her rescuer, was being painted as the villain. The click of the closet lock was like the crack of a whip in the mansion's tense air. For a moment, no one moved. The social worker, Claudia, was the first to break the silence, impatience creasing her professional face. "This is unacceptable. Sergeant, we'll have to force the door. The child is putting herself at risk." Arthur stepped forward, his entire body a protective barrier between them and Leah's small hiding place. "No," he said, his voice low but charged with an authority that surprised everyone. "You will not break down that door. You will not terrorize her any more than you already have. Give me 1 minute." He turned and knelt in front of the closet door. "Leah, it's me, Mr. Arthur. No one is going to hurt you. I'm right here. I won't let them take you." A muffled sob was the only reply. "Time is wasting, Mr. Drummond," Claudia said, crossing her arms. Your method is clearly not working. The protocol is clear. To hell with your protocol, Arthur snapped, his frustration finally breaking through his composure. He stood up, facing the woman. Does your protocol not see the terror in her eyes? Does it not understand that she's not being stubborn? She's panicking. Your system has failed her before. That's why she's so afraid. The accusation hung in the air, heavy and uncomfortable. Officer Sandra looked from Arthur to the closet door, a flicker of uncertainty on her brow. She saw the cold logic of procedure, but she also saw the genuine pain on Arthur's face and heard the real terror in Leah's sobs. Something didn't add up with the simple narrative of a worried father and a meddling benefactor. Sergeant Davis was about to interject, to reassert the authority of the law, when the phone on his belt vibrated insistently. With a sigh of annoyance, he stepped away to answer it. Davis, yes, the name is Ricardo Hayes. Understood. Go on. The room fell into an expectant silence. Arthur watched the sergeant's face, trying to decipher any change. The officer's expression shifted from professional and stern to one of restrained surprise, and then to deep, grim contemplation. He jotted down a few notes in a small pad, murmuring, "Right, received, thank you," before hanging up. He remained silent for a long moment, his gaze distant. When he finally looked up, his demeanor was entirely different. He didn't look at Arthur with suspicion, but with a new, complex assessment. He glanced at the social workers and then at the closet door. "What is it, Sergeant?" Sandra asked, sensing the shift in the atmosphere. Davis holstered his phone, the movement slow and deliberate. "That was dispatch," he said, his voice grave. "They ran a preliminary background check on Ricardo Hayes in other states. It seems this isn't the first time his daughter has gone missing near a highway." A chill ran down Arthur's spine. The revelation hit the room like a shockwave. 2 years ago, in a neighboring state, a local businessman reported finding a little girl in very similar circumstances. The sergeant continued. The father, Ricardo Hayes, filed a kidnapping complaint. The case caused quite a stir in the local media. "And what happened?" Arthur asked, his heart in his throat. Sergeant Davis met his gaze directly, and for the first time, Arthur saw a flicker of empathy in his eyes. The complaint was dropped a week later. The businessman refused to comment, but unofficial sources suggested a financial settlement had been made to compensate the family's trauma. The case was closed due to a lack of cooperation from the complainant. The truth fell upon them, hideous and undeniable. It wasn't neglect. It wasn't simple abandonment. It was a pattern, a cruel, premeditated scheme. Claudia, the social worker, went pale, speechless. Sergeant Davis then turned to Arthur, the weight of the law in his voice, but with a new tone of warning. "Mr. Drummond, you are no longer under investigation for kidnapping, but you and the girl are now the primary witnesses in a much uglier case. And that, I'm afraid, may put you both in far greater danger than you imagined." Sergeant Davis's words completely redefined the battlefield. The immediate danger of Leah being forcibly removed had dissipated, replaced by a darker, more insidious threat. Arthur was no longer the suspect. He was the centerpiece of a case exposing a depravity that went far beyond simple neglect. Ricardo Hayes wasn't just an unfit father, he was a predator who used his own daughter as bait. The social worker, Claudia, visibly shaken, cleared her throat. "In that case, the situation changes. The girl needs protection, perhaps a specialized shelter." "No," Arthur interrupted, his voice unshakable. "She stays here. This is the safest place for her. I have 24/7 private security. No shelter can offer that." He looked at the sergeant. "You just said we're in danger. Removing Leah from the one environment where she feels even remotely safe would be cruel and reckless." Sergeant Davis considered this for a moment, his gaze fixed on the closet door. Arthur's logic was irrefutable. The mansion, with its high walls and security system, was a fortress compared to any public institution. For now, she stays, he decided, to Arthur's immense relief. But with supervision, Officer Sandra will remain here as a protective measure and to observe your interactions, and CPS will make daily visits. That's non-negotiable, Mr. Drummond. It was a compromise, but one Arthur readily accepted. Anything to keep Leah with him. With the decision made, the team dispersed. The other social worker left, visibly relieved to be out of the complex situation. Claudia remained, her hard expression replaced by one of professional concern. Sergeant Davis gave instructions to Sandra and promised to return with more information. The house grew quiet again, but the atmosphere had been forever changed. Arthur knelt once more in front of the closet. "Leah, they're gone. Only Officer Sandra is staying, and she's here to protect us. You can come out now. It's okay." It took a long minute, but finally the door creaked open. Leah peeked out, her eyes red and frightened. Seeing only Arthur and Officer Sandra, who offered her a small, reassuring smile, she slowly emerged. She ran to Arthur, hugging him tightly. He wrapped his arms around her, feeling her small body tremble. "I've got you," he whispered into her hair, "always." In the following days, the mansion transformed into a kind of headquarters. Officer Sandra settled in discreetly, her presence a constant reminder of the danger that surrounded them. She was professional, but Arthur noticed the way her eyes softened whenever Leah was near. Gradually, Leah began to warm up to her, realizing the uniform wasn't a threat, but a shield. Claudia's visits were more formal, filled with questions and notes. Arthur answered everything patiently, knowing his every word was being scrutinized. He focused on creating a bubble of normalcy for Leah. They put together jigsaw puzzles, watched more movies than he'd ever seen in his life, and spent hours in the garden. It was during one of these afternoons, while they were planting flowers in a small bed, that Arthur began to see a new side of Leah. "Daddy didn't like flowers," she said suddenly, her small voice quiet as she patted dirt around a daisy seedling. "He said they were messy." Arthur stopped, his trowel in hand. "Well, I think they're beautiful," he replied carefully. "They make the world more colorful." Leah looked at the flower, then at him, her eyes serious. "When the other lady came to get me, the other time, she gave me a flower, but Daddy threw it away after she left." The mention of the other time made Arthur's blood run cold. He sat down on the grass beside her. "Another time, Leah? Do you remember someone else finding you on the road?" She nodded, plucking at a blade of grass. "Yeah, a man with glasses. He bought me ice cream. He was nice, but Daddy got mad at him. He yelled a lot on the phone. Then the man with glasses went away and never came back." The simplicity of her account was devastating. She didn't understand the financial transaction, the extortion. To her, it was just a series of encounters with kind people who, inexplicably, disappeared from her life after her father got involved. Each of these rescues was a new promise of kindness, followed by another painful lesson in abandonment. Arthur felt a wave of nausea. Ricardo's cruelty was deeper than he had imagined. He didn't just exploit his daughter, he repeatedly exposed her to hope, only to snatch it away. The emotional wound this created was incalculable. He realized that the battle for Leah's custody wasn't just a legal matter. It was a race against time to save her soul before mistrust and despair consumed her completely. That night, after Leah had fallen asleep, Arthur made a decision. Being reactive was no longer enough. He had to be proactive. He called the best private investigator in the country. "I need you to find everything on Ricardo Hayes," he said into the phone. "And I also need you to find the man with glasses who bought a little girl ice cream 2 years ago. I'm going to end this scheme, whatever it takes." The decision to hire a private investigator, a man named Jonas, marked a fundamental shift in Arthur's approach. He was no longer a victim of circumstance, but an active agent in the pursuit of justice. While Jonas delved into the depths of Ricardo Hayes's life, Arthur focused on strengthening the emotional walls around Leah. Trying to repair the damage that years of manipulation had caused, Officer Sandra's constant presence became a surprisingly positive element. She had a calm, practical demeanor that seemed to soothe Leah. Often, Arthur would find them in the kitchen, Leah on a stool helping Helena stir cake batter, while Sandra told funny stories about her German shepherd. They were glimpses of a normal childhood, precious moments Arthur treasured. His own relationship with Leah deepened as well, evolving from protector and protected to something closer to family. He learned to decipher her silences, to understand the fear in her eyes when a car slowed down in front of the house, to feel the genuine joy in her laughter when they played hide and seek in the garden. One evening, as he was tucking her into bed, Leah snuggled into her pillow and asked, her voice sleepy, "Mr. Arthur, does love run out?" The question, so simple and so complex, caught Arthur off guard. He sat on the edge of her bed, his heart aching. "Why do you ask that, sweetheart?" "Because Mommy loved Daddy, and then she went away. And Daddy, he doesn't love me anymore," she whispered, the vulnerability in her voice cutting through Arthur's soul. He swallowed hard, searching for the right words. "Leah, real love, the right kind of love, doesn't run out. Sometimes people get confused. Sometimes they don't know how to love the right way, but that is not your fault. It never was, and it never will be." He stroked her hair. "The love I feel for you, the love Helena feels, and even Sandra, that love isn't going anywhere. It stays right here, safe." She seemed to ponder his words, and after a moment her small eyes drifted shut, her breathing becoming soft and even. Arthur stayed there for a long time, watching her sleep. That small conversation revealed the depth of her scars. The maternal abandonment, followed by paternal neglect and exploitation, had taught her a terrible lesson, that love was conditional, transient, and ultimately painful. Arthur's mission became even clearer. He had to show her that unconditional love existed, a safe harbor that would never disappear. A week later, Jonas called with his initial findings, and they were worse than Arthur had imagined. Ricardo Hayes had a trail of petty fraud, gambling debts, and jobs he'd been fired from for erratic behavior. Leah's mother, a woman named Beatrice, had dropped off the map 5 years earlier. There was no death certificate, no contact with family. She had simply vanished, leaving her 1-year-old daughter behind. More disturbing, Jonas discovered that Ricardo had come into a small inheritance shortly after Beatrice disappeared. Money he'd burned through in less than a year. The police at the time had investigated briefly, but Ricardo claimed she'd run off on him, and with no evidence to the contrary, the case was closed. The revelation planted a seed of ice in Arthur's stomach. "You think he—" Arthur started, but couldn't finish the sentence. "There's no evidence of foul play, Arthur," Jonas said, his voice grave, "but the pattern is troubling. He gets rid of responsibilities that become inconvenient. First the wife, now the daughter." The most crucial part of the investigation, however, came when Jonas located the man with glasses. His name was Samuel, a retired teacher living in seclusion in the countryside. It took a great deal of persuasion, but Samuel finally agreed to speak with Arthur, on the condition that it be over the phone. Samuel's voice was shaky, laden with guilt and fear. "I never should have gotten involved," he said. "I found her on the road, just like you. I thought she was lost. The father showed up, crying, saying his wife had left him, that he was at the end of his rope." Samuel paused, his breathing heavy. "I helped him. I gave him some money to get back on his feet. A week later, he called me, saying the police were investigating a kidnapping. He said I could go to jail, that my reputation would be ruined, unless I helped him a little more. He blackmailed me for nearly 6 months, until he'd drained my savings. He threatened me, said he knew where my grandkids went to school. I had to move, cut contact with everyone. He ruined my life." Samuel's account painted the full picture. Ricardo wasn't an opportunist. He was a systematic predator who had perfected his method over time, using his victims' empathy as a weapon against them. Arthur hung up, feeling physically ill. He looked out the window at the garden, where Leah and Sandra were laughing as they built a block castle. The innocence of the scene contrasted brutally with the sordidness he had just uncovered. He knew now that he wasn't dealing with a simple custody case. He was at war with a monster, and to win, he would need a weapon Ricardo didn't expect, one that could expose the truth in a way no court could ignore. Samuel's confession was the missing piece of the puzzle, turning terrifying suspicions into certainty. Arthur felt the weight of the world on his shoulders. It was no longer enough to protect Leah physically. He had to dismantle the web of lies and manipulation Ricardo had woven so expertly. The coming legal battle would be brutal, and the word of a frightened child and a terrified old man might not be enough against a man who knew how to exploit the system's loopholes. He needed something irrefutable, proof that would speak for itself. The idea came to him during a sleepless night as he replayed the conversation with Samuel. Ricardo operated in the shadows, using the phone to intimidate and extort. What if he could bring those shadows into the light? Arthur contacted Jonas again with a new plan, risky and ethically complex, but one he felt was his only chance. "Jonas, I need you to help me set a trap. Ricardo will be in touch again. He's out of money. It's just a matter of time. When he calls, I need the conversation recorded, and I need him to admit to the scheme." There was a legal risk, but Arthur's attorney, a pragmatic man named Mr. Thorne, confirmed that under certain circumstances, recordings could be used as evidence if they demonstrated the perpetration of a crime like extortion. It was a fine line, but Arthur was willing to walk it. The weight was agonizing. With each passing day, Arthur felt the tension mount. He tried to maintain a facade of normalcy for Leah, but internally he was on high alert. He watched as the little girl blossomed under his care. She had started to laugh freely, to ask curious questions about the world, and even to have small fits of childish stubbornness, a sign, he knew, that she was feeling safe enough to test boundaries. One day, she drew a picture of a tall stick figure, a small girl, and a big, fluffy dog, inspired by Sandra's stories. "This is our family," she said, presenting the drawing to Arthur with radiant pride. The words hit Arthur with the force of a revelation. Somewhere along the line, without him even realizing it, the line between protecting and loving had dissolved. He was no longer just caring for her out of a sense of duty. He loved her. The thought of losing her to Ricardo was physically painful, a prospect he could not and would not accept. Finally, the call came. Arthur was in his office reviewing some documents when his personal cell phone rang, displaying a blocked number. He took a deep breath, signaled to Sandra, who was discreetly in a corner of the room, and activated the recording device. "Drummond," he answered, his voice like ice. "Miss me?" Ricardo's voice slithered through the line, arrogant and smug. "Thought it was time we had a chat about my daughter's welfare. I hear she's living in the lap of luxury. That must be costing you a pretty penny. Maybe I need a stipend to keep up." "The game is over, Ricardo," Arthur said, his voice firm. "The police know about your scheme. They know about the case from 2 years ago." There was a slight pause. "Rumors," Ricardo said, but there was a new edge of nervousness in his voice. "You have no proof. I have a father whose life you destroyed. His word against yours? The word of some senile old man. Good luck with that," Ricardo scoffed. Arthur decided to play his bait. "You're right. Maybe it's not enough. That's why I'm offering you a deal. One last time. I'm listening. $100,000. In return, you sign the papers, relinquish all parental rights to Leah, and disappear. Forever." The silence on the other end was long. Arthur could almost hear the gears turning in Ricardo's mind. Weighing greed against risk. $100,000 is low, he said finally, the arrogance returning. For the trauma, the inconvenience, 200,000, and the papers come after the money. No, Arthur said, you're not in a position to bargain. 100,000, half now, half after you sign. And you're going to admit to me, right here, right now, that this is what you've always done. That Leah was just a tool for you to get money. He held his breath. It was a long shot. Ricardo could hang up, see the trap, but his greed and his ego were his greatest weaknesses. Ricardo's laugh was bitter. You're a sharp one, Drummond, I'll give you that. Yeah, why not? The kid was a magnet for guys like you and old Samuel, soft hearts and deep pockets. It was a good business while it lasted. But 200 grand is my final price for retirement. Bingo! Arthur felt a mixture of triumph and revulsion. He had the confession. Deal. I'll send you the details for the exchange, Arthur said, and hung up, his hand trembling. He looked at Sandra, who was watching him with an expression of reluctant respect. He had the proof he needed, but at the same time, a new, terrible realization dawned on him. Leah, in a moment of courage, would have to listen to that recording. She would have to confront the devastating truth that her own father saw her not as a daughter, but as a business. The legal battle might be closer to victory, but the battle for Leah's heart was about to become infinitely more difficult. With the recording in hand, Arthur felt like he was holding a ticking bomb. It was the key to Leah's freedom, but also a weapon that could shatter what was left of her innocence. Mr. Thorne, his attorney, listened to the recording with a grim expression. This is dynamite, Arthur. It's a clear confession of extortion and child endangerment. With Samuel's testimony and Ricardo's history, we have an extremely strong case. But Leah will have to be exposed to it, Arthur finished, the weight of the decision crushing him. The DA will want to use this at the custody hearing, and Ricardo's defense, however weak, will try to discredit Leah, claiming she was manipulated by you. The prospect was nauseating. They would have to prepare Leah, not just for a hearing, but for the cruelest truth of her life. The task fell to Arthur, supported by Sandra and a child psychologist recommended by CPS, a kind woman named Dr. Elisa. They chose a sunny afternoon to talk to her in the garden, the place she felt happiest and safest. Leah was sitting on the grass, weaving a daisy chain, when Arthur sat beside her. Leah, we need to talk about something important, he began, his voice gentle. It's about your daddy. Leah stopped what she was doing, her body stiffening slightly. Is he coming back to get me? She asked, fear returning to her eyes. No, sweetheart. He's not going to get you, Arthur said, taking her small hand. Not ever again. But to make sure that happens, so you can stay here with me forever, if you want to. We need the judge to understand why you weren't safe with him. He paused, searching for the words. Sometimes, Leah, grown-ups do very wrong things, things that hurt kids, even if it's not with a slap. They use words and tricks to get what they want. He looked at Dr. Elisa, who nodded encouragingly. Leah, do you remember when your dad would leave you by the road? The psychologist asked in a calm voice. Leah nodded, her gaze cast downward. He taught me what to say, she whispered, her voice nearly inaudible. He said I should cry and look sad so good people would stop to help. The confession, spoken in a shamed whisper, hung in the air. Arthur's heart constricted. It was worse than he'd thought. She wasn't just a passive lure. She had been coached, forced to be complicit in her own exploitation. He told me it was a game, she continued, a single tear rolling down her cheek. But I didn't like the game. And that time, with you, I didn't want to play anymore. I didn't want to go back because you were kind. You gave me a warm coat and you didn't yell at me. The revelation was devastating. Leah's desperate courage on the road hadn't been just an act of defiance, but a conscious choice. She had broken the rules of her father's game because, for the first time, she'd glimpsed an alternative, a life where kindness was real and not a performance to deceive strangers. You were so brave, Leah. Arthur said, his voice thick with emotion. "The bravest thing anyone could do. And because of your courage, we can fix things." "But I lied to the other people," she said, guilt heavy in her voice. "No, Leah," Dr. Elisa interjected. "You didn't lie. You did what you had to do to survive. The blame is not on you. The blame is on the adult who put you in that situation." In the days that followed, Dr. Elisa worked with Leah, helping her articulate her feelings and understand that her story was important and her voice deserved to be heard. Arthur watched the process with a mixture of pain and admiration. The resilience of that little soul was extraordinary. Meanwhile, the date for the custody hearing approached. The tension in the house was palpable. Mr. Thorne prepared the case. Jonas gathered the last details on Ricardo's finances, and Sandra kept a constant watch as Ricardo, now cornered, was more unpredictable than ever. One night, Arthur found Leah awake, staring out the window at the moon. "Do you think the judge will believe me?" she asked, anxiety plain in her voice. Arthur hugged her. "I don't think so, Leah. I know so, because the truth has a power that no lie can ever beat. And your truth is the most powerful thing in the world." But deep in his heart, a doubt lingered. The legal system was a maze of technicalities and procedures, and on the other side was an unscrupulous man, advised by an equally vile lawyer who would fight with every dirty trick at his disposal. The hearing wouldn't just be a clash between truth and lies, but a final test of courage for a 6-year-old girl who had already faced more battles than most adults. The air in the courthouse was cold and sterile, smelling of old paper and contained anxiety. Every echo of their footsteps on the marble floor felt like a hammer against Arthur's chest. He held Leah's hand, feeling her small, cold fingers tremble within his. She was dressed in a simple blue dress Helena had bought, her hair neatly combed, but nothing could hide the vulnerability in her huge, frightened eyes. She looked at the tall wooden doors of the hearing room as if they were the entrance to a monster's cage. Across the hall, he saw him, Ricardo Hayes, wearing an ill-fitting suit, trying to project a look of false repentance. Beside him stood a lawyer with a sneer that didn't reach his cold, calculating eyes. Ricardo met Arthur's gaze, and for a second, the mask of the grieving father slipped, revealing the predator beneath. It was a silent promise that he wouldn't go down easy. The hearing room was smaller than Arthur had imagined, which only made it feel more claustrophobic. They sat beside Mr. Thorne, facing the judge, a man with a stern face and a piercing gaze. The hearing began, and Ricardo's lawyer spoke first. He painted a picture of a hard-working, grieving single father whose beloved daughter had been influenced and alienated by a lonely millionaire looking to buy a family. Every word was a knife twisted in Arthur's gut. Then it was Mr. Thorne's turn. With methodical calm, he dismantled the facade. He presented photos of the squalid house, Sergeant Davis's testimony about the highway abandonment, and read the sworn affidavit from Samuel, the retired teacher, detailing the systematic extortion that had destroyed his life. The atmosphere in the room began to shift. The judge's gaze grew sharper. The final blow came when Mr. Thorne requested permission to play the recording. Ricardo's lawyer objected, but the judge, with a wave of his hand, allowed it. Ricardo's voice filled the room, arrogant and cruel. "The kid was a magnet for guys like you. Soft hearts and deep pockets. It was a good business while it lasted." The silence that followed was absolute. Ricardo had gone pale, sweat beading on his forehead. His lawyer looked genuinely shocked, realizing his client had omitted the extent of his own depravity. The judge looked at Ricardo with glacial contempt. It seemed the case was over, but Ricardo's lawyer, recovering quickly, played his last card. "Your Honor, my client was under immense pressure. His words, though unfortunate, were the result of desperation and manipulation by Mr. Drummond, who offered him money, trying to buy his daughter. What he truly wants is a chance to reconcile, perhaps with a financial settlement, to ensure Leah has the future she deserves. It was a brazen attempt to reframe extortion as a plea for help, blackmail as a negotiation. Ricardo stared at Arthur, his eyes burning with hatred, a clear warning that if he lost here, he would find another way to make their lives hell. The judge listened to it all, his face an impenetrable mask. He shuffled the papers on his desk, the silence stretching for an eternity. Arthur felt Leah tremble beside him. Finally, the judge looked up, his gaze passing over all the adults in the room before it landed with unexpected gentleness on the small figure beside Arthur. He removed his glasses, his stern expression softening. I've heard the evidence, he said, his voice echoing in the quiet room. Now, I need to hear from the only person whose opinion truly matters in this case. Arthur held his breath. Beside him, Leah shrank back, her face ashen. The moment he had dreaded most was here. Her fate rested on the fragile shoulders of a little girl forced to confront her greatest nightmare. Then, in the absolute silence, the judge's deep voice boomed across the room, sealing the climax of their agonizing journey. Leah Hayes, please approach the bench. Every step Leah took toward the judge's bench was torture for Arthur. He watched her walk, her back straight, a stubborn fragility in her posture. He wanted to run, to scoop her up and shield her from this moment, this scrutiny, but he knew this was her walk to take. It was her voice that needed to be heard, her truth that had to seal all their fates. The room was so quiet he could hear his own shallow, rapid breathing. The judge waited until Leah was settled in a chair that seemed far too big for her and leaned forward, his stern expression completely gone, replaced by that of a grandfather. "Hello, Leah," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle. "My name is George. I know this place is a little scary with all these serious people, but you don't have to be afraid. No one here is mad at you. We just want to make sure you'll be happy and safe. Do you understand?" Leah nodded, her eyes fixed on him. "I just want to ask you one very simple question," the judge continued. "There's no right or wrong answer. I just want you to tell me what your heart feels. Leah, where do you want to live?" The silence returned thicker than before. Leah looked down at her hands, which were clasped in her lap. Arthur saw her lips tremble. She raised her gaze, past her father, who was staring at her with an intensity that was a silent command, and then her eyes landed on Arthur. In her gaze, he saw their entire journey, the fear on the road, the safety of his coat, the laughter in the garden, the promise that real love doesn't run out. When she finally spoke, her voice was small but clear as a bell, filling every corner of the room. "I want to live with Mr. Arthur," she said. Ricardo's lawyer started to rise in objection, but the judge silenced him with a look. "Can you tell me why, Leah?" Judge Peterson asked, his voice still soft. Leah took a deep breath, a courage seeming to come from some deep, inner well. Because, with my daddy, I was cold, and I had to play a game that made me sad," she said, the simple words carrying immense weight. "With Mr. Arthur, I have a warm coat, and he taught me how to plant flowers. He reads stories with funny voices, and he never, ever asked me to lie." She paused and looked directly at the judge, childish honesty shining in her eyes. "He told me his love doesn't go anywhere. I believe him. I want to stay where the love stays." A silent sob escaped Arthur. Her words were more powerful than any legal argument, more damning than any recording. They were the purest, most undeniable truth. In that moment, the case was over. The judge looked at Ricardo, whose face was twisted into a mask of impotent fury. The charade had crumbled. The judge banged his gavel, the sound echoing like a starting gun for a new life. "Full and permanent custody of Leah Hayes is hereby granted to Mr. Arthur Drummond," he declared, his voice ringing with final authority. All parental rights of Ricardo Hayes are, as of this moment, irrevocably terminated. I further recommend that the District Attorney's Office open a full criminal investigation into the allegations of extortion and child endangerment. Everything happened quickly after that. Ricardo was escorted from the room, shooting one last venomous look at Arthur. But Arthur didn't see him. He only had eyes for Leah, who ran back to him and jumped into his arms. He held her tight, burying his face in her hair, finally letting tears of relief and love flow freely. "It's over, my love," he whispered. "It's over, we're home." She nestled into his chest, her small body relaxing for the first time in weeks. The battle was over, the war was won. And in the silence of that cold courtroom, a family had been born. 6 months passed. Autumn had arrived, painting the world in shades of gold and amber. Arthur's mansion, once a sanctuary of solitary silence and order, now pulsed with a new, vibrant life. The most common sound was no longer the ticking of an old clock, but Leah's infectious laughter, which echoed through the halls as she chased Apollo, a golden retriever puppy Arthur had adopted for her. Leah's adoption had been finalized, the papers signed, the Drummond name now legally hers. But the true certificate of their family wasn't written on paper. It was written in the small daily rituals. In the way Arthur now knew how to make the perfect braid. In the way Leah ran to the door every day when he came home from work. In the tight hugs before bed. He was no longer just a protector. He was a father. And she was no longer a lost girl. She was a daughter. On that Thursday afternoon, exactly 6 months after that fateful day, they were back on the highway. The same ribbon of grey asphalt, but the world around them looked different. The sky wasn't grim and threatening, but a vast, clear blue. The afternoon sun warmed the inside of the car, and Leah, buckled into her car seat in the back, hummed a happy tune as she gazed out the window. Arthur glanced in the rearview mirror and met her eyes, bright and full of life. The ghost of the scared, tear-streaked girl was gone, replaced by a child who radiated safety and love. "This is it, isn't it, Daddy?" she asked suddenly, her voice soft. She didn't use Mr. Arthur anymore. The title of Daddy had emerged naturally, shyly at first, and was now spoken with a certainty that filled Arthur's heart with warmth. He slowed the car, looking at the stretch of shoulder where it had all begun. "Yes, my love, this is it." He stopped the car, but there was no despair in the air now, only a deep, serene gratitude. "I was scared that day," she confessed, her voice low. "I was too," Arthur replied, turning to look at her. "But it was the best day of my life, because it was the day I found you. You saved me," she said. He smiled, his eyes misting over. "No, Leah, we saved each other." He put the car back in gear. Their trip wasn't an exercise in painful nostalgia, but a mission of hope. They were on their way to the opening of the first Leah Foundation Center. With his fortune and determination, Arthur had created an organization dedicated to helping children in complex, vulnerable situations, focusing on exposing and combating exploitation schemes like Ricardo's. The foundation also offered free legal support to people like Samuel, who, in an act of compassion, had become victims themselves. Leah was the inspiration, the beating heart of it all. She had helped pick the paint colors for the center and assemble welcome kits for the children, insisting that each one include a teddy bear, because no one should feel alone. The road that had once symbolized abandonment and despair was now a path to a future of second chances. It was living proof that the most unlikely encounters can forge the strongest, most unbreakable bonds. Arthur Drummond learned that true wealth wasn't measured in bank accounts, but in the courage to fight for what is right, even when the world seems against you. And Leah Drummond discovered that true family isn't defined by the blood we share, but by the unconditional love that protects us and the hand that reaches for us on the side of the road. As the sun set on the horizon, casting long, golden shadows across the asphalt, Arthur looked at the little girl in the rearview mirror. She was no longer a piece in a cruel game. She was a force of nature, a survivor who, by finding a home, had also found the strength to light the way for others. The deserted highway that had witnessed an act of cruelty now echoed with a promise of redemption, proving that when compassion meets courage, even the deepest wounds can be transformed into a triumph of love.